All right, thank you everybody for joining. This is Asif Rahmani, and with me today is Jill Hanneman. Uh, we're going to be, well, Jill is going to be, not me, is going to be doing a webinar talking very specific to, of course, the things that you are interested in regarding change and regarding transformation. Things that obviously, many of us talk about, but we have to have good experience in it, practicing it in order to describe it to as to what it is truly and how it benefits you and also how it benefits the users. So I'm very much looking forward to Jill's perspective. And if you don't know Jill, Jill has been around for quite a long time actually in the community, currently doing advisory services for Avanade, but before that also other companies such as Witham, Smith Brown, and then Portal Solutions before that, talking very specifically about information architecture, taxonomy design, portal strategy, things that, of course, you have to know and you have to have seen also in multiple environments to be able to know what to do and what not to do. So Jill, very much looking forward to it. What we're going to have, this question is going to come up later anyway, so I might as well tackle it right now. On our site, which is VisualSP.com, you're going to find Jill's webinar within a few days under the Learning Hub and webinars. So we put all of our latest webinars there. Learning Hub webinars, if I go there, let me just show it to you. This is where you can go and see any other older webinars that we have done already. And all you gotta do is just click on it. You'll see it. There's no sign-in screen or anything else. And you can actually search the transcripts and stuff as well. We try to make it, well, whichever we can. Not all of them have transcripts. So, but we try to make it as interactive as possible. We try to make it as easy and simple as possible. So go ahead and enjoy, and any feedback you have about what we're doing in terms of these webinars and these topics, I always welcome feedback. So please let us know. Okay. One more thing. I don't know if you're all familiar with VisualSP.com and what VisualSP does. So just a quick thing on this. VisualSP provides in-context help, as it says, and support and training to users on any web application. So we've, of course, done it for SharePoint, for Office 365 for many, many years now, but now we support any web application. What it really means, just to give you a quick perspective, if I click on the Try It Now, and this is, of course, showing a SharePoint mockup page, but it could be any page. This is part of VisualSP. This pop-up, for example, that just came up and is guiding me as a user. And this tab right here is part of VisualSP. So I can, go around and, for example, click on how to get around in SharePoint in this case, and it's giving me a tour of SharePoint. And it could be an interactive tour also where it's telling me to click on certain things before it moves forward. And there's lots of content you can provide in terms of videos and walkthroughs and all kinds of stuff directly in here, or rich HTML like that. In addition to that, providing inline help icons like these. So what does it mean with documents? If I click on it as a user, hopefully, here we go. What is a document library? It shows up, shows me exactly what it means, what a document library is. So providing inline help icons, providing context-sensitive help and training, and just information of any kind, I think is super, super important to users, in my opinion, as a trainer myself. So let us know if we can help, and we'll go from there. Alrighty, with that, let me go ahead and change the presenter to Jill. Jill, here we go. All
All right,
yours.
thanks, Asif. And so as I'm getting myself set up here, I'm just going to call out quickly. So I noticed on Twitter this morning, I think, Asif, that you posted a tweet about how there's a need help link on the home screen of Office 365, but there's no other link. The link is not persistent throughout
Right.
the user experience. And so, it's one of those things that you don't really take into account as you're thinking through, how are my users going to adopt this? Where are they going to be able to find help? Are they going to even be able to trust the links that we provide to them if we do provide inline help? Are they going to be useful? Are they going to find that they can trust them? So I think it's kind of an interesting way to lead into our conversation about creating your change journey. And I'll just start off quickly. Thank you for the really fabulous introduction. I won't spend any time here because as Asif mentioned, I've been in the SharePoint space for quite some time. I've actually been working in knowledge management and with other portal products for about 15 plus years or so. I just did the plus because I stopped counting. And so I've always really looked at technology and tools like SharePoint as mechanisms to promote knowledge management, to promote the storing and the retention of content and the organization of content, to ultimately allow ourselves to find information more easily, connect ourselves with other experts and other individuals, and ultimately not have to reinvent the wheel every single time. Even though I'll say in this 15-year span, it still feels like we are reinventing the wheel. And I think what I'm really excited about with the technology right now is that we're finally starting to see with machine learning, machine teaching, that these tools and technologies are catching up to the rate of change that we are requiring. And so it's a very exciting time to be in knowledge management, I think, and maybe even just technology as well. So with that said, I'm coming to you guys from Seattle, Washington today. It is still my morning, and I just had my second cup of coffee. So hopefully we will have a really good conversation over the next hour around creating your change journey. So I'm going to focus on, this is our agenda. We're going to talk about planning your Office 365 rollout. Just for context, I'm going to assume that most of you have kind of figured that piece out. And then we're going to work through talking about human-centered change, lessons on change, creating your change journey approach. And then I have a case study to share, and and I think that's a nice way to wrap it up. So when so I've been doing this for quite some time. I've been in the consulting space, and I've worked with a lot of different companies, and some have done change better than others. I will say, the least effective ones, and this is kind of cliche, the least effective ones just focus on training. They think, oh well, we need to add training at the end. And what I always want to add to that conversation is, where's our communication plan? I think that, as we're talking about governance, change and communication go hand in hand with that, with setting up your governance structure. Because ultimately, with a portal, with an intranet, with Office 365 for workplace productivity and workplace experience, these tools are getting embedded into the way our folks work. And it's not just a tool. We're not just training about a new technology, but we really ought to be leading more so with what is the task, what is the ask, what is the day-to-day look like of our employees, and how do these tools fit into that, and how are we asking them to leverage these tools? Because oftentimes, as these tools have matured, as they've changed, we are asking our folks to do more. We're asking them to have more clicks. We're asking them to be cognizant and record more data points in the systems that we're asking them to use. And all of those different components are helpful for the way we run our business. They improve transparency in being able to retain information and knowledge. However, we are asking the user to take more actions, and we're asking them to take more steps. And so we want to, the phrase that we have at Avanade for change management is that we are leading a journey from awareness to adoption in the rollout of new employee experience, workplace experience products. And so that awareness piece is a really critical point in your change journey as you are building adoption. And it's not just usage, it's not just training, but we are looking at building adoption. So, and some of the other work that we do, we focus a lot on workplace experience, and we're also looking at how when you combine and you focus on employee experience and you treat your employees like they are your customers. You look at the way, you look at their needs and you look to improve their user experience the way you would your customer experience. You want to reduce the friction. You want to reduce the amount of trouble that they're going through, the the labor that is involved with each and every task. We are able to see really tangible and hard ROI associated with improving and creating these seamless experiences. So this is really one of the key pieces in the employee experience that people will say. So if you run a survey around employee experience and you're gathering feedback, oftentimes the technology is one of the highest pieces that you aren't leveraging the most up-to-date technology, or the technology is clunky, or it's slow, it's not responsive to how fast the requests are coming in for the work that those folks need to do. And so we want to create interoperability between these systems. We want to create simplistic, personalized experiences and focus on the task that our workers are being asked to do. All right, so just kind of framing the conversation a little bit in talking about your Office 365 rollout. Um, I like this slide for two reasons. One, if any of you are legacy SharePoint users, have used SharePoint in the past, MOS 2007, SharePoint 2010, this should be kind of ironic to you. So I put the Swiss Army knife up there because that for a long time was how SharePoint in itself was described. It was the Swiss Army knife. It was good at doing a lot of things, but it was the master at doing none of them. So I appreciate the laugh, Asif.
Oh yeah. The wheel of SharePoint, the Swiss Army knife, these things I think we grew up with seeing this thing for years and years.
Exactly, exactly. And so now, the items in the circle graph have changed. They now represent all the different capabilities that you get in Office 365, but the analogy of the Swiss Army knife has not changed. And so we're still, having a lot of questions of what to use when, and rolling out Office 365, should we roll all of it out to our users all at once? And obviously the answer to that is always no. You should not roll everything out to everyone all at once, and that should be a part of your change journey to streamline and roll those things out incrementally. But that's all to say that everyone has their own threshold for change. And it's important to acknowledge that of the different types of user groups that you have within your organization. And that's why personas, are still around. They're still a very, very valuable part of any technology rollout, because you may find that your IT group, yes, they have a really high tolerance for change, and you can roll out all of Office 365 and you can, get them onboarded, and they're great at being a pilot group. But when you get to your call centers, for instance, they are very regimented in their process. Time is very critical to them. Rolling out all of Office 365 is not a great idea. And we focus in then on what are the business critical applications for them that we need to be mindful of. So it's really important to focus in on defining those core user groups and where you think they may sit in the spectrum. So this is a really classic slide from, this is the point in time where Microsoft decided that they were going to become, and they were going to provide some prescriptive guidance to their customer base around how and when to use the different components of Office 365. So we have SharePoint running as the backbone of content collaboration within Office 365, but we're now looking at having Teams be the forward-facing layer for your inner loop collaboration, and Yammer as your communities of practice, organizational communications, leadership connections, special interest groups, for that outer loop of connectivity and collaboration. And then, of course, we have email. And so this is not to tell you exactly how to plan your Office 365 rollout. It's just an idea. It's an idea that Microsoft is socializing, and that's ultimately embedded in even the latest updates that have come from Ignite. And I'm just showing you here an idea of a sample roadmap for your Office 365 deployment. And this is really a combination of IT meeting the business. So IT may have certain drivers. There may be a data center consolidation. There may be a data center closing that is going on with a movement to move items to the cloud. There are license deprecations. There are license that you are not planning to renew. You are planning to continue to move to OneDrive, or you're planning on discontinuing Slack and your commitment is going to be to Teams for collaboration. Whatever that is, it's always a little bit different, and it's a lot very nuanced for every single organization. That's going to drive a lot of how you roll these different pieces out. It's just a fact of life. But what we can do is we can think about how this will impact the business and how we can stagger that rollout to be kinder to our employee base and consider what resources we have available to support those folks in that journey. And again, I'll use the phrase a couple of times, planning that white glove rollout and change management strategy for your user base will help in that adoption process. So you'll notice one thing I'll point out in this slide before I continue on is that change management, training, communication, and user adoption is a line that continues throughout the entire roadmap that we have here. But this is just one idea of thinking through how do you align the requirements and the needs of IT operations with how you are planning on rolling out to your business. And then one other thing I'll point out here. So in the red line, we have our unstructured file storage management rollout. So this organization in particular started with their OneDrive rollout, migrating personal drives into OneDrive and their Windows 10 upgrade, Office Pro Plus upgrade. Then they moved into their group file share migrations, moving those files into SharePoint Online, and also looking at their SharePoint on-premises environment and moving those pieces and replicating them to a certain degree in SharePoint Online and doing some transformation. And then they're looking at moving into team spaces and setting those team spaces up. Teams is at the end of the roadmap for these guys, and one of the reasons is that they have another tool that they're currently leveraging for some of the capabilities in Teams, and so they are going to be piloting and they're going to be trying those pieces out before they make a full rollover and cutover for the organization. So regardless of whether or not you are 100 people, a 100-person organization, or a 20, 50,000 person organization, a plan like this is really helpful to have that 30,000-foot view of when are we going to be rolling out all of these individual components, and then you align it with your IT needs and requirements. And then you also align it with Microsoft's recommended path for what workloads are dependency workloads that provide a foundational layer and permissions and authentication for you to then continue to build on as you roll out more workloads within Office 365. So definitely worthwhile to spend some time coming up with this strategy if this is the point with which with where you're at. I do understand that there are probably folks on the call who have already rolled out Office 365, and there's never a bad moment to still address your adoption plan.
So, Jill, I have a hard question for you, if you're willing to take it.
Okay, let's
Okay.
go. Let's do it.
Uh, Many times I've heard people uh, say to me that, our executives are pushing to roll everything out because that's what they're hearing from Microsoft, that you want to open up everything, all of Office 365 workloads at once. They come to me saying, I don't think it's a good idea personally, and I agree. I don't wear a Microsoft badge personally, so I look at it from the customer's perspective that yes, if you do open up everything, that means you have to provide governance and guidance and best practices and handle everything. That becomes your problem. But when the pressure is coming many times from Microsoft to the executives, to the IT person or whoever is doing it, that becomes very difficult. What would you suggest in that situation?
I would still push back, and I think that there's So, and I know you realize this, there's a lot of context and nuance in all of these different situations, right? Um, if the footprint to migrate content into Office 365, and there's no legacy footprint, or your organization is small enough that you can ask users to move things on their own, you can provide some guidance and some training and a white glove service to help walk them through that process. You can start to introduce these pieces, I think, a little bit more rapidly. And even though this sample roadmap that I am showing you here has a time span of 2 years. This is for a slightly larger organization that has lots of terabytes of content that they need to move. They have IT requirements for data center relocation that are time sensitive that they're really fighting against. So they're trying to get that done by the first half of 2020. Um, I would still push back as as a change manager, as a advocate for the user experience, and ask them, I know you want to roll this out, but let's be really strategic about what is the user experience that we're trying to design here, what is the employee experience we're trying to design here, and to give all these tools to our folks all at once, it's inherently confusing.
I agree with you. Thanks very much for that. And folks out there, if you have any questions also, please put in the questions panel and I'll go ahead and pitch it to Jill as well.
Okay, so now getting into defining our change journey. So I love this slide just because it's very whimsical and nice and graphic, and it really depicts that journey, that idea of awareness to adoption. So what we're going to go through now for this portion of the conversation in discussing and creating our change journey approach are these higher level, these boxes up at the top. So comprehending the change and impacts. This is a nice way of saying we need to understand what is the difference in the user experience of what we're taking away and what we're providing is new. How different is it going to be? I've worked with a number of organizations that they were moving from Google G Suite to Office 365. So their users are already really familiar working in a browser experience. They're already really familiar working with co-authoring and certain expectations that they have from the benefits of using G Suite. So the change is going to be slightly different for those folks because we're not taking them off desktop apps. They're already in the cloud, they're already familiar using a browser. And so we're acknowledging that the change impact for those users is going to be ever so slightly different. And so that's just one example, and trying to understand the scale with which the change is going to be for those users, and how, what we're going to be asking them to use. I'll also give another example of organizations that would move from Lotus Notes to Exchange for the first time. So this is kind of a dated reference, since I hope no one out there is still on Lotus Notes and moving to Exchange. But I went through a few of those with some of my customers back a number of years ago, and that's a pretty big change. It's a pretty big change for the users, and the change approach and the change journey is a little bit more complex. And you have to think through a lot more around how you're going to navigate and how you're going to articulate that level of change. However, upgrading Exchange on-prem to Exchange online, folks are already familiar using Outlook, and you can bridge the gap with some training and a few conversations. So again, comprehending that change, really, really critical. Then we move into mobilizing a force for change. And this is building your change network. This is building your ambassadors, building your early adopters, building your, creating your pilot. These are the people who are going to become your best friends and your champions and your advocates for the change that's happening. And you want to build that network pretty early on. Then we get into developing your game plan. And so that's taking, into account the impact of the change and feedback you've gotten from that mobilization network. And you start creating what those activities on what are we going to do throughout this process to help communicate and to help our users understand, what's happening and when things are happening. Then, as we journey with our users through the change, so if you can imagine, this is when you're rolling out, this is when you're actually really doing the change. And you're rolling out the new systems, you're conducting the migration, you're cutting folks over into the new environment. You have your change in communication and training tools. You have set up those workshops or those clinics or check-ins. And then at the very end, you measure your adoption, and hopefully it's a diamond. It's not always a diamond. Sometimes you journey for a good number of cycles before you get to your diamond, but you can consider that those last two steps pretty cyclical as you aim to improve your adoption numbers. So we really focus on defining that human-centered change, and I feel really privileged because I get to work with some people who are very experienced in organizational change management, and not just folks who are experienced with Office 365. They are just organizational change management practitioners, and learning from them, I've updated my own thinking in how to roll out these technology pieces and how to really craft those stories to impact and create those change journeys. So these 4 bullets on the left are really items that are good rules of thumb. You want to create a change story. Why are we doing this? How is this going to benefit the user? How is this going to benefit the organization? And crafting that vision is really important for people to get that sense of what's in it for me or what's in it for the organization. Why are we doing this? Why am I being asked to do this? And then your behavioral and cultural transformation. This is always putting the change in context with the work that is being altered. And so it's not just that we're getting a new SharePoint. It's not that we're updating Office Pro Plus. It's how are some of the changes going to benefit your work, and how might your work process be altering because we are asking you to take several different steps. Contextualized business-centric adoption. And so this is going back to the idea that each business group has its own need and has its own perspective. So your IT group may be your early adopters. They may have a very high tolerance for change. But again, your call center individuals, low tolerance for change. Not a lot of time to learn and to have the bandwidth to experiment, because their work life is very structured and centered a lot around accomplishing tasks in a certain amount of time. And then creating dynamic and modular communications and training. Gone are the days where you go to, well, I can't say gone are the days, but the traditional sense of in-person training is not the only way to deliver training anymore. And as Asif was showing, VisualSP, inline training help. This is a great way of delivering change and making it repeatable and making it reliable for your users. Other ideas are creating little video snippets that folks can go, or the idea of having a knowledge base with questions and a really good search that people can find answers to their questions on how to do things. So coming up and being creative with the different ways that you set up training and communications for your folks are really helpful. So I mentioned personas already, and I'm gonna continue to kind of harp on that. So providing context to the different business groups who you are you are asking to change or you're rolling out change to. This is from Microsoft, actually, and one of the things that we often do for our clients is that we will do these day in the life storyboards. This is a regular practice that we build into the change journeys that we're doing for our customers. And as you can see on the left, you build each of the day in the life storyboards for the different business groups and the different personas that you've identified within your organization. And these are out of the box. These are available from Microsoft if you don't have the bandwidth to do this. I think these are really great. And if you have the ability to take this idea and personalize it to your particular business groups, that just makes it even, makes it resonate even more and makes it even more impactful to your user groups. But these resources are available to you if you don't have the bandwidth to write your own.
Are these customizable?
You know what? This is a hotly debated topic.
Okay.
um, if you search for these on the web, you're going to find the PDF versions, obviously uneditable.
Right.
However, I do know that there are different ways that you can access editable files. And I haven't heard of a direct path. I know some folks internal to Avanade have editable versions of this. You could create your own version of this. If you know someone on the Teams team, like Caruana,
Hmm.
may be able to get your hands on the editable versions of these. So, it's a little roundabout.
Gotcha.
But at the very least, if you want to check these out and you think that these could be helpful to you, they are available to you in PDF.
Thanks.
And so kind of continuing on the teams topic, Microsoft really wants to get you on these tools, and they are doing more than ever to provide you with these resources to help you in defining your change journey and creating that contextualized experience. So I did put the URL in this slide for this page for tools for driving adoption. And I will also say that there's this really, really awesome Teams adoption flipbook. So if you are joining this call specifically because you are working to roll out Teams, which a lot of people are, this flipbook could be really helpful to you. It's an animated Adobe flipbook, and it has a lot of these personas. It has some journeys in there. It's a really nice tool that can provide you with a very prescriptive guide to rolling teams out for your organization. And so it actually follows a lot of the same principles that I'm sharing in this deck. It's just very team specific. So now kind of continuing on with our change journey approach. So we have comprehending the change, your surveys, interviews, your workshops. Then I'll go through, mobilizing your force for change, building your change network, developing your game plan, and then journeying with your users through that change and sustaining and monitoring and measuring that adoption. So comprehending the change and impacts. This is one, defining your why statement, like I said earlier, but it's also discovering those stakeholders, building those personas, elaborating the impacts on understanding and understanding those impacts in the user experience and what's going to happen, what we're asking the user to do, and then also uncovering those moments of change. And I'm going to give an example here of a why statement that I think is really interesting. So I'm actually involved in a project right now for a very large healthcare institution that is going to be asking their users to migrate their own files into OneDrive. Okay, so putting into context, these are healthcare practitioners. We're talking about hospitals, care clinics, etc. And we're asking these people to migrate their own files to OneDrive from their file share, network file share to OneDrive. This is a really tall order. This is a really big ask. And after talking with the client a bit more, we're going to be communicating their vision statement, their why statement, the what's in it for me, um, in back to the mission of the organization to provide excellent and affordable health care to their patients, because that's ultimately what all these practitioners really care about. They are very aligned and they are very committed to their mission. And ultimately, it would cost this organization millions and millions and millions of dollars in order to migrate everyone's personal drives to OneDrive automatically. But they are going to be asking each of these individuals to migrate their own files and in turn save the organization millions of dollars that they can then put toward updating other systems and or just improving and not having to raise costs for their patients. So this is the why statement. It's not so much a what's in it for me, but this is a what's in it for our organization. We are asking everyone in the organization to, to contribute, to play a role in making sure that the organization is able to continue to fulfill against its mission. And that's going to carry a lot of weight with these individuals. These folks would probably see this communication, they would probably hear it from their managers and think, gosh, why do I have to do this? When am I going to find time to do this? Or, I have to learn something to move these files and figure out how to do this. I'm not even sure, if I'm going to know where things go or how this is going to work. So there's going to be a lot of questions raised, and defining that why statement is going to be really critical for this group to ensure that they are able to successfully execute on this mission. So, and in this context, we are creating a net new change, albeit it's temporary and it's finite, but it's a net new change that we are asking these users to migrate their own files to OneDrive, and as a result, we're aligning this why statement so that we can help to, understand more about what they need to do. So when so that scenario is pretty finite. In the reality of how you want to understand what your users are doing, interviews and workshops are often the most traditional ways to go. Trying to gather feedback to define the personas. We're doing this actually for a pharmaceutical company who is looking to optimize and roll out Office 365. So they're going through interviews and workshops right now to define their personas, to also identify those moments of change and where the real impact is going to be in asking their users to leverage different tools and technology, and or how we can make it better for them. So then we'll move on into identifying and prioritizing, and that all will help to inform our change strategy and our roadmap. And so I like to say that, all of this is happening in tandem with your actual execution roadmap. So these are activities that, if you have a change manager who is aligned with your project, with your rollout, then these are things that you'd want to kind of keep in mind. If you are that same person, if you are the change manager and you are the the rollout manager and you are IT and you are help desk, if you are all of those things, then it's important to just, as you are planning out your activities, just dog ear and be really cognizant and empathetic to where your users are in their journey and what change you're asking them to do.
I joke I like to make in my sessions sometimes, Jill, is I started out being a technologist and now I feel like I'm a psychologist because
Right.
honestly, what you're saying right now is so true that in change management, digital adoption, whatever you want to call it, empathy is so important. is so important. The what's in it for me is super important, more important than technology that's used to do all that stuff.
Right. And now the ask is, how do we make the technology so easy, so foolproof? Apple does a really great job of this. When you get your new iPhone or something, they make it so easy for you to transfer your data from your old phone to your new phone. How do we make that kind of user experience in this Office 365 rollout? And even in something as simple as migrating your files from a file share to OneDrive, how do we make it so foolproof that the user doesn't have any questions and it just happens? And we're able to make it a dream, all the while, letting them know why this is important to the organization. So yes, just a little bit of psychology there. And so as you start to build your change strategy, this is actually a graph I've used and really believed in for quite some time. So I had that diagram of sort of the what to use when with Office 365. This is just another way of visualizing that. And it can also be a part of your overall rollout strategy and your roadmap for Office 365. But this is just another way of looking at how you're going to be using the tools in Office 365. So at the bottom, we have individual file storage, communication, to groups, to teams, to department, and all the way up to the organization. And then we have priority, time, sensitivity. So urgent, high, ad hoc, low at the bottom. And you can rank how the tools will be leveraged in Office 365 for this type of communication. So this is really a nice way of sharing with your users, here's how we're going to leverage these things. And this is where you're going to do your work. And this is, where you store your files and where we're going to have, all company communications and whatnot. And so, developing your game plan, it's really great to have, you will have your change vision, the what's in it for me, and then defining that key message, you build your change network, and you have your value measurements. This is another way of putting together that game plan, and I'm just giving you guys some examples here. So they all kind of correlate back to that roadmap of how you're going to roll out Office 365 or where you are within your journey. And this radial approach kind of shows different goals, or different work streams of what you're going to be getting out of Office 365. So the communication tools, if you're going to be moving telephony to Teams and when that might be happening, the work anywhere piece, how are we and when are we going to enable mobile apps or BYOD, connecting and participating. So having that idea of meetings and social communication, and then workforce effectiveness, process, unstructured file organization and management. So just another way of articulating the timing and the sequence of these types of things. So then we mobilize our force for change. And this is, I love this part because this is usually the part where, you may start, hopefully in your, let me rephrase this. As you're beginning your journey and as you are identifying, you're doing interviews, you're doing workshops to uncover those personas, to gather the requirements, to understand what the challenges are that your users have. Let those people, based on their reaction and their feedback, let those people start to begin and become your change network. So I love to start the communication with those folks because they are actively participating in your design process. And as you continue to engage those folks through your design process, through to execution, through to rollout, they are going to become your change network. They're going to be the folks who understand the genesis of the design. They feel invested in the rollout and what's happening because they've contributed to the scope and the shape of it, and they're going to help you become spread your reach to further parts of the organization as the change rolls out. So I love leveraging those folks to become your change network and continuing to meet with them often. So I've done with a couple of different organizations, I've done what we call like steering committees, and we'll meet with those steering committees. And I've done this at a global scale with some very large organizations where we had maybe 30 different people or so a part of our steering committee who were a part of the design, and we would meet with them and ask for their opinion on different checkpoints as we were going through our agile development cycle. And so these steering committees then translate into becoming our ambassadors. And we leverage them as we begin to roll out to their network, and work with them to coordinate and to balance off the training needs that they believe will be most effective and most helpful for their networks. So it's really important to build that network, even if you are a smaller organization. So as we journey with our users through the change, and what that means practically is when you start to roll it out, and how do we communicate that the rollout is coming? How do we provide resources to our users while we are rolling out? And what do we provide to our users once the cutover has occurred? And so there are a number of ideas that we employ. One is a change campaign video. And so we have designed that for ourselves within Avanade. We have also leveraged change campaign videos quite a bit for a number of our customers. But I also realize that creating a change campaign video isn't really at the disposal of a lot of organizations. And so what else can you do? So you can leverage, what to use when training. You can define an app that demos teams for your users. You can create different user journey surveys, and also leverage those day in the life scenarios that we provided, that I showed you earlier, that Microsoft provides. So creating and coming up with these creative solutions are your tools, the tools in your toolbox that will help your users to communicate the change and also provide them with the resources that they need. And as we continue with our journeying with our users through the change, we combine our change strategy and our business-centric plan into these communication tools and training tools. So persona-based videos, on-demand, in-context training tools, IT service help desk docs, and making sure that everyone is equipped to be able to respond to asks and needs, and to provide the right provide each group with the right training. And then this is also where training tools like VisualSP are really helpful, because, as we started off this webinar, it's there. There's certainly aspects within Office 365 that are lacking with training and with training tools. And a tool like VisualSP can be that consistent thread, and a trusted resource that users can come to rely upon as they are getting their work done in this system.
Appreciate the vote of confidence, Jill. Thank you.
No problem.
On top of that, one thing for people to remember is that these platforms that we deal with are truly platforms. They're not just systems that are built and you cannot do anything with them. And we try as VisualSP also to tell people about this, that you got to think beyond the fundamental stuff that's already built. When you make a new list and that list has information about your resellers or something else, and people are struggling to understand how do I manage this list or etc., well, that business function could also be helped by a true tool like VisualSP, where you educate them, help them at the moment of need about the business solutions that you have built on top of the platform. I think that's even more important than the fundamental functionality that's underlying in the platform.
Absolutely, because most of the needs are just these simple asks, like how do I manage this list now that I have a new SharePoint and we're using modern lists now, and I knew how to do it before, but they moved they moved the function that I always used. They moved the
Exactly.
manage view.
Oh
So
yeah.
where do I find that again? And it's this in time type question that really hangs people up in the change, and is the moment um, of of not of frustration for the user, that if we're able to eliminate that moment of frustration for them, then I think it's a win.
Agree.
So the last piece I'm going to share is around, sustaining, monitoring your change adoption. This is not a one and done, and your journey will continue. But it's really, I think, important to also measure how effective your adoption is going within Office 365. So one of the new announcements that came out of Ignite that I'm excited about is the new Microsoft Productivity Score, and how it's going to provide measurement around employee engagement and the technical experience. And so, Microsoft is continuing to get smarter about how to provide analytics to their customers around how these tools are being consumed as a platform within the day-to-day of their users' lives, and what that technical experience is based on certain algorithms. So, leverage these tools and let that be an informed guide on how to revamp, how to revisit, and further support your end users in leveraging the tools to get their work done. And so I'm not going to really spend much time in this. I'm going to move on to our case study, but just to let you know that it's there, just a sample timeline for you and how some of those activities can play out. So I'm going to share with you a quick case study, and this is actually very personal. So this is how Avanade has rolled out Teams. We've been in our Teams rollout for the last almost about a year or so now. And being so we're about 30, 35, 40,000 people globally. And what I love is talking with our organizational change management folks about how this change process has gone for Avanade. And this is just a sample of what I walk into, what I see when I walk into the office in Seattle. So when I go to our office, I walk up to the second floor, and this is what I see. It's the time for Teams. And this banner showed up one day, and it was, it's a part of our change journey and communications awareness around the fact that we are transitioning from Skype for Business to Teams. And so just, a quick high level snapshot on where we're at. We started this process, I think, around April. And the way they did it is that they identified about 300 users who were going to become pilot users who were, they got rid of Skype and they completely transitioned to Teams, while the rest of the organization continued to have Teams and Skype and kind of live in islands mode with both tools running, and you could use them agnostically of one another. And so the whole planning process was a true partnership between IT and organizational change management and communications. And so, we started off with our unified communications and figuring out what's the infrastructure needs of Teams for Avanade, and what are some of our biggest challenges as we look to make this cutover. So we identified network. We we acknowledged that it was completely different from Skype on premises. The quality of service was not traditional, and we needed to optimize the internet to be closer to the users in order to accommodate the network demand that Teams would have for our users. And we also acknowledge that the life of the consultant is different. It's unique. Um, we're technology savvy, but we are very resistant to change because we come to rely on tools and we need things to move quickly. And so you can kind of see that in a lot of the trends that we noticed. But these are just some stats that we took. And these stats, I think, are actually from around May, June timeframe. So at that time, we were maybe about 2 months into the coexistence of teams, and we already started seeing trends upward in our team's activity and seeing downward trend in Skype. And so, we would monitor these data points just to take a look at, how were our folks transitioning and how are they adopting and looking and starting to use Teams throughout the organization. One of the things I like to point out here is that chat messages were a very quick uptick. Channel messages, you can see, had a very, very low uptick. And this was, maybe only 2 months in. And it kind of demonstrated for us that that chat was very familiar, and it was it was not an uncommon method of communication for folks. However, channel messages they're intentionally transparent. It was a different paradigm. We were putting people in teams and asking them to share conversation items that would be shared with a much larger audience than if they were just to send an individual chat. And so you can see that decision point in, do I send this to just one person or do I open it up to the rest of the team, being something that was a bit of a hurdle and a change management point for our organization. And so I think that that's really important because we were able to then look at other ways that we could support that cultural shift in becoming a transparent organization and supporting the governance structure that we had set up for teams in the way people were using it. So as you look at your data, it's really great to create those inflection points and to pivot into areas where the technology might be actually exposing a cultural shift that you're asking of the organization that is sort of inherent in the tool, but not something that you necessarily deliberately set out to do, but you want to have happen. And so I think it's really good to kind of think about items in both those contexts. So this is actually a snapshot of a message that I recently got. We just completed our cutover. And in fact, I believe I was just cut over yesterday. So I lost Skype for Business. Haven't been using Skype for Business for a long time, but we are now Teams only organizationally throughout Avanade. And so this is a big deal for us. But we're creating and providing multiple live events where our IT and our organizational change management are getting on to support folks and providing outreach. And so I'm just really proud to see us, seeing the cobbler put shoes on its children, basically, with this transition. So a few of the lessons learned that we had from this is our change management approach um, can accelerate and or impede this deployment. And so the fact that we were able to team with some of the practitioners in our OCM group helped to maintain the cadence that the IT team had in plan for our team's transition. And we inherently focused on value to our end users. So efficiency, effectiveness, two very important things, reliability for consultants. And so these were the areas that we focused on greatly. And then we also acknowledged that Skype to Teams, it was not just a technology migration. And this was a much more complicated beast, looking at, unified communications, looking at collaboration, looking at simply the way we are transparent in our communications and how we share messages with one another. For every wave, they the team established a go, no go criteria before they went on the wave. And this was really important for them to make sure that we were bringing the users along in the journey. And then the technical and user readiness planning always occurred in parallel. And they maintained those two tracks to make sure that we weren't leaving the end user behind. And then finally, migration end state is temporary. We're all aware of how quickly everything is evolving with Teams. We get new features every other week. And so the OCM team realizes this is a moving target. Things will continue to evolve, and we'll continue to update our communications to our user base. So I'm wrapping up here, and I think we're actually a minute to go. I can't believe that timing. So I'm happy to spend the time taking any questions or any feedback that you have, Asif, that you'd like to add.
Uh, the, well, first of all, you're right. Impeccable timing. That's wonderful. On the dot. So thank you very much. And I also want to thank you formally, Jill, for providing all this knowledge and spending the time. I've also been very intently looking and listening to your presentation. And I think people who have here today and people who will listen to it later in a recording will all appreciate it. Just before everybody gets out of here, I want to make sure everybody understands that we'll be sending out an email next few days. There's going to be a link to slide and also the slides from Jill, and also a link to the recording that's going to be on the website. I agree with everything that you've said, Jill. There's not many questions that I have remaining in my mind, and I think we answered the questions in the Q&A as well. Folks, if you do go to a conference, look up Jill. She is a wonderful presenter as well. I've been into her sessions before. I don't know if she knows that, but I have definitely been there, Jill. And you've done a great job there as well, and so as here as well. So please come up to us and talk to us at conferences if you go there, or reach out to us. Jill has provided her email address, and mine is asif, ASIF, at visualsp.com. So thank you everybody for being with us, and we'll talk to you next time. And thank you very much, Jill, once again.